Hello YouTube, vParsa is back, and today I'll be profiling my Tearlaments deck profile. So this is a little project I've been wanting to work on ever since the last ban list came out that banned Abyss Dweller and Limited Shifter, and graveyard decks are back, and what's a better graveyard deck than Tearlaments? And it's a deck that I wanted to play at the end of the Limbo format right before Alliance Inside came out, but I still had too much fun with it, and I wanted to play it a little into Alliance Inside format, and it's done decent. I mean, the only weird matchup is Malice, just because of how Whitebinder can banish your graveyard effects, and how Heart Cryptor can banish your cards on the field, but that's the only awkward matchup. And just Malice is nearly unbeatable when it goes first, uninterrupted, and spoiler alert, I don't play any hand traps in this deck. So, and Malice actually resembles Tearlaments a lot when they were at full power in their prime, because it wasn't just about the field presence, you also had to worry about the grave, you had to worry about the hand, and you had a lot of layered disruptions, and it was really well known for being able to play on your turn. So, other than that though, every other matchup is winnable. Mitsurugi is a good matchup because just imagine for a minute that they have that ritual monster that says you have to discard in order to evade the negation. Well, discarding is a benefit from this deck, especially when it's off of a card effect, which it is off of that monster. And you still have to play good Yu-Gi-Oh though. Don't think you're automatically going to win. You still have to play good Yu-Gi-Oh and outskill your opponent. But as I said, this deck is just kind of meant to be played for fun. There aren't any hand traps just because this deck can't really afford to play that many hand traps. So before I get into the profile though, I do want to just mention two things so you're aware of it. Number one, just bear in mind that Tearlaments don't have any standard combos. You know, there are some decks, just because I'm using it as an analogy here, there are some decks that have like their roads already built out for them, and they're driving on the road, and they just have to take some left and right turns depending on what type of hand traps and interactions your opponent throws at you. But Tearlaments are a deck where you're building your road as you're driving, and that's part of the reason I like it so much, is because your combos are never standard. You always have to figure out what to work with depending on what you mill, when you mill it, and most of the boards are never the same. But having said that, there are going to be a lot of hypothetical situations I'm going to talk throughout the deck profile. Then the second disclaimer is that this deck, at this stage with how crippled it is meant to be played to player preference. So I'm going to put this in the title as well, but in case you forgot to read the title, this deck is not going to have any Horus cards, nor is it going to have any Fiendsmith cards. And I don't necessarily think those engines are bad. In fact, I think it's the exact opposite. I think those engines are so good to the point where they can realistically be played in any deck if you wanted to. And in most of the profiles I've seen and deck combos I've seen, those engines are pulling most of the weight. And it often feels like you're winning in spite of your tier name, not because of them. And personally, I don't enjoy that. I wanted to play Tearlaments as pure as possible. I wanted to play Tearlaments where it feels like I'm winning with Tearlament cards. So if you were looking for a Horus or Fiendsmith engine, I'm sorry to say this deck is not for you. But if you're someone who likes to play Tearlaments in different ways, please keep watching my deck profile. But having said that, you do still have to mix Tearlaments with something just because of how crippled it is. And I'm mixing Tearlaments with a Shaddoll engine. So this is a Tearlaments Shaddoll deck. And 2 years ago on my profile, I uploaded a Shaddoll Tearlament deck. And I never profiled them, but I did update the deck as time went on. And the ban list kept hitting some more cards that supported the Tear engine. But now it's inverted. This is a Tearlament deck with a small Shaddoll package to help support it. And when I say Tearlament Shaddolls, I don't mean I'm just playing Shaddoll Beast and Winda. I don't think, I'm a longtime Shaddoll fan, and I don't think playing just Beast and Winda makes it part Shaddoll. So the Shaddoll engine is a little bigger than normal, and I'll get to that when we get to the end of the deck profile. So without further ado, let's talk about the deck. Alright, so your Tearlament engine is going to be pretty standard. So you're still playing, obviously you're going to play 3 copies of the best field spell in the game, and this is going to search your Tearlament's Rhino Heart. which is then going to also search your Tearlaments Kashtira, and then 1 copy of each of the fusers, because unfortunately these cards are limited, or fortunately, depending on your point of view. Now, this is, as I said, pretty standard. I don't really ever see this engine changing up. I think Konami could potentially cut back on the ban list just a little bit with this deck and give us 2 copies of Sheeran and 2 copies of Merly. I love Tearlaments, but just to not be too biased, I think Havness should stay at 1, because what made this deck so fun to play or frustrating to play against, depending on your perspective, is how it can play on your opponent's turn so well. And Havness was obviously the cause of that, just because when your opponent triggers a card effect, it would summon itself and mill 3. But I don't think the deck would suddenly break Yu-Gi-Oh! If you just give us 2 Sheeran and 2 Merly. So that's it for the Tearlament monsters. Then for the Tearlament spell and trap support, 3 copies of Tearlament Scream, 1 copy of Tearlament Grief, and then 1 copy of Tearlament Heartbeat. So Heartbeat's a card that a lot of tier decks have either cut entirely or they just side it, but I like Heartbeat, and as I mentioned before, I want to feel like I'm winning with tier names, and what better way than to mill your traps and get a graveyard effect off of it, and then mill your Heartbeat to get your trap back, and that just further adds to the ability of winning with tier names and tier card effects. So the traps, speaking of which, it's 2 copies of Soliak, and then the 1 copy of Crime. So Crime actually needs to be in the side deck. Unfortunately, this needs to be a Meta Noise, but I couldn't find a Meta Noise. I thought I had one, but I didn't, so I just had to make a last minute adjustment. But yeah, Meta Noise is better, and I think Crime is more suited to be in the side deck. And then that is it for all the tier cards. And then the next card, 2 cards, helps bridge the tier engine with the next engine, which is going to be Foolish Burial Goods. So this can of course send any of these, but most likely you're going to want to send Trivi Karma. So Trivi Karma can search any card that mentions Visa Starfrost. So you can search the field spell, you can search Tearlament Scream, you can search any of these, but you can also search the Kashtira field spell, and I am playing a little small Kashtira engine just to help get to your Tearlaments Kashtira quicker. And then obviously Fenrir is a standalone good card as well, and it does help break board, especially when you're trying to go second. Alright, so now for the more support cards, 2 copies of King of the Swamp. I think 2 is the right number to where you're going to mill this card when you need it, but at the same time you're not breaking on this card. And I'm not playing Polymerization or anything. I think that stage that leads to a lot of potential bricks. And then 3 copies of Danger Nessie to help with those bricks, and then obviously the 1 Danger Mothman as well. So just a small danger package to help get the cards from your hand into the grave. And Nessie, of course, is an Aqua, and it is level 7. So between Kashtira Fenrir, Tearlaments Kashtira, and Nessie, you have plenty of level 7s to make a certain card in the extra deck that we'll get into later as part of your main combo. And then only 1 copy of a Shuffler. I don't play the other Shuffler just because, once again, this deck can have a lot of potential bricks. And the issue at this stage with Tearlaments is that there are going to be awkward moments where you open cards in your hand that you don't want to be in your hand, you want them to be in the grave. And then there are moments you're going to mill cards that you don't want to be in the grave, you want them to be in your hand. So to just you really want to reduce the amount of bricks as much as possible, and mostly play cards that are good to see in your hand and in the grave, which is why I don't play any hand traps. And then 1 copy of Card Destruction. So this is a bit of a risky card. You can cut it if you want to, but I personally think Card Destruction is amazing in this deck. Obviously I side it out if you have a Dark World matchup after every 10 duels. But however, I still think Card Destruction benefits this deck way more than it can benefit any other deck you play against, unless, once again, it's like a Dark World matchup that you have once in a blue moon. But otherwise, just side it out if you need to, but I think it's really good in this deck. Then, what Tearlaments has always been known for is the ability to play on your opponent's turn, and with the Ishizu names, you could mill 5 to 10 cards on your opponent's turn and trigger a bunch of effects. So I wanted to try to go back to that as much as possible and mimic that as much as possible. So I'm playing Trap Tracks. So this is a trap that it destroys your monster on the field, and you can set a normal trap, and it can be used that turn, but you can only activate one trap card for the rest of the turn. And activating one trap card, however, does not conflict with having a Tearlaments Shaddoll on the field and then using its effect, because that's not a trap card, it's a trap effect. So yeah, and then obviously the card that's destroyed off of this gets its Grave Effect, which can benefit this deck. And the card you're going to be setting off of this is just going to be Needlebug Nest. So yes, it's a trap, but it's a very good trap. It's a trap that can also help going second, since you can mill a tier name, which can sometimes break boards. And obviously we have ways to get around the fact that it's a trap. Trap Tracks is one of them, but also I do play one copy of Transaction Rollback. So you can potentially use Needlebug Nest to mill 5 cards, and then you can use Rollback to copy the effect of Needlebug Nest to mill 5 more cards, and there you go. We're back into the good old days of tier, where the vintage moments of tier, where you're resolving a bunch of effects on your opponent's turn. Even if you haven't milled the Needlebug Nest, you can also use Rollback to copy Trap Tracks, which can then set the Needlebug Nest and then mill 5 cards. So lots of great ways to keep your engine going and trigger a bunch of effects, even when it's your opponent's turn. Okay, so then the Shaddoll engine. So just please bear in mind, most of what I did talk about, have talked about, it's been pretty standard at this stage, but the Shaddoll engine is where my Tearlament deck differentiates itself. So there's going to be a lot of discussion here, so just bear with me. The Shaddoll package is going to be one copy of Shaddoll Squamata. This can send any Shaddoll you want to the grave, and you can send Shaddoll Wendy to then summon your Shaddoll Beast. You can also send your Red Shaddoll Incarnation, and then I am playing the Shaddoll Schism. And I guess I can go ahead and spoil the extra deck a little bit. Here's Shaddoll Winda and then Shaddoll Apkalone. Okay, so why this? Well, because, well, first of all, I don't play Hell Shaddoll Hollow. And the reason I don't play Hell Shaddoll Hollow is that to get the maximum value out of it, you really want to have a bunch of different attributes on the field to mill a bunch of cards. And the timing is just awkward to get your cards on the field and have Hell Shaddoll Hollow remain in the deck and then mill it when you have a bunch of cards on the field. So getting that timing right is just too awkward, and milling a few cards off of it just really wasn't benefiting this deck enough when I tested it. But why do I play these Shaddoll cards? So this is the right ratio of Shaddoll cards that help advance your tier combos, but you don't brick on them too much. So Squamata, typically when I mill Squamata, I send the Shaddoll the Incarnation. And then throughout later in your combo, maybe it's you mill a bunch of cards off of your Tearlaments Scream, your Tearlaments Kashtira, your Sheeran Havness, Needlebug Nest, whatever. Whether it's your turn or your opponent's turn, at some point maybe you mill a Shaddoll Windy, and then Windy can summon your Shaddoll Beast, and now Incarnation can banish itself and typically Squamata to flip the Beast face up. And that's good going first or second, because not only are you advancing your game state on your turn, but on your opponent's turn you could potentially trigger a tier name, which could then disrupt your opponent. And maybe you've already milled your Shaddoll Beast and you drew a card off of it, so now Wendy can summon your Squamata in face down defense position, and then Incarnation can flip Squamata face up on your opponent's turn, and you have a disruption. Maybe you already have Incarnation in your hand, and although it's not ideal, it can help you as well, just because you can then revive your Squamata or Beast and then use their effects on the following turn. And also, even if this card is in the grave, you can add it back when either of these go to the grave, and then you can bring back your Winda, for instance, if your opponent outs it. Then your El Shaddoll Apkalone, I mean, you send this off of Granguinol, so that you're going to make this with a tier name and King of the Swamp, which would substitute the Blazing Cartesia. So the combo usually goes Granguinol, send Apkalone, Apkalone add Schism, and then discard something to, get a benefit graveyard effect that benefits you. And then maybe later in the duel, you then put Apkalone back into the deck to maybe make a Mud Dragon or a King of the Swamp or even Winda. And then, so you make Window with a tier name and another Shaddoll that's already in the grave. And then you can use Schism, since Wendy is a different attribute, that now allows you to use Schism to make your app cologne in addition to having a Window on the field. So a lot of different possibilities in this deck, a lot of different ways to use the Shaddoll engine. You just have to be creative and know how to use them depending on when you mill your cards and what you mill and when you mill. But again, those are just some typical hypotheticals that I wanted to go over with how this deck can benefit, how this engine can benefit your Tearlament deck. All right, so that's it for the main deck. It's 43 cards. I think you want to go over 40 to just a little bit so that you minimize the bricks. And part of those bricks are actually, believe it or not, the tier names themselves. You don't really want to mill the tier names too early. Ideally, you want to start loading up your grade with cards and then build the tier names. So I think going over 40 is the correct call for this deck. So let's get into the extra deck. So I already talked about these cards, and then you play each of the tier fusion names that you can. Obviously, Rukalos, you make this with King of the Swamp, since King of the Swamp can replace Kid Kalos. And as much as I love tier, I don't think Kid Kalos can ever come back into the game. That card did way too much in one monster. I mean, it searches any tier card you want. It can mill 5 cards. It can be a monster reborn. And often, all 3 effects would be used in one turn. So that's just way too much advantage for one card. And I'd like to see maybe Konami give us more tier support in the future, where Kid Kalos is split up into 3 separate cards. But yeah, I don't think Kid Kalos can ever come back, unfortunately. And then Grapha. So Grapha is better than Rukalos in every way, but the only thing is that it doesn't have the tier name, and that sometimes matters. Draco Stapelia, and obviously this is a really good card in this current meta game because Raziel has fallen off a little bit, but you can use this on a Raziel monster. Its level now is level 1, and your opponent can't use it as Xyz material. This came up against the Dragon Ruler deck, where my opponent now doesn't have 2 level 7 monsters for the same reason. And it can also maybe come against Mitsurugi, where you disrupt their levels on the field, and now they're not able to tribute it for the full ritual summon. And then for the quote-unquote super poly monsters that you still summon normally, Mud Dragon. So this is obviously still good to protect your cards, to protect your window from being impermed, and it's a level 4 body on the field to make your Time Thief Redoer. Spoiler alert, I play that card still. But I did have a funny matchup at locals one time where I played against a Infernoble deck, and I summoned Mud Dragon, not knowing what I was playing against. I just thought it'd be good to leave on the field. And then after I saw it was Infernoble, I'm like, oh, this is actually an auto win card, because you're just going to call fire, and then people forget that your opponent also can't target monsters with that same attribute. And since Infernoble are just about all fire cards, and the whole mechanic of the deck is equipping with equip spells and equip monsters, equipping counts as targeting, so they couldn't play their own deck and play the game. I don't really summon Garura too often anymore, just because Beatrice is banned, but I think you still want to play Garura, just because every now and then you do encounter this awkward moment where you might mill a tier name, trigger its effect, and then the deck gets shuffled, and then later on in your combos you mill that same name again, which is obviously their once per turn, so they're not going to do anything. And then you might later mill a different tier name, and then those tier cards need to go into Garura just so you can put them back into your deck to mill them again on your opponent's turn. So then for the Xyz monsters, one Time Thief Redoer just to help trigger your Sheeran, and then Dracosac. So Dracosac is, we play a lot of level 7 monsters, so your standard combo is you want to have 2 level 7s go into Dracosac. Dracosac then summons 2 level 3 tokens. The 2 level 3 tokens will then go into Cherubini. Cherubini can then dump your King of the Swamp, and then these 2 can make Sprite Sprend. Sprend can then send your Merly, and then Merly and then the King of the Swamp will go into Granguinol to get your Shaddoll combos going. And also don't forget with Sprend, if you've used Redoer's effect, Redoer will then come back and then steal a card from your opponent's deck as material, which sometimes isn't gonna do anything, but Sprend, if it's on the field with the Redoer, then that just becomes a disruption because you can detach it off of the Redoer if the card that you stole isn't really going to benefit from Redoer's effect. And then finally 1 IP Masquerena and then 1 SP Little Knight as well. So that's it for the extra deck and main deck. Now for my side deck, I'm not the biggest fan of my side deck. I think it has room to grow, but I just had to put something together. You can change up the side deck however you feel like because side deck is player preference. But 3 copies of Gamma Seal just because it's a kaiju that is an aqua, which can help break boards and fuse. Now, the only reason I'm playing Gamma Seal though is just I knew Malice with an Adagnister support would take off, but I didn't know how many players were going to play regular Adagnisters where they summon the Arrival. And again, since this deck doesn't play hand traps, you basically lost when your opponent goes the Arrival Adagnister, unless you have a Kaiju to out it. Then 3 copies of Dimensional Barrier. Not the biggest fan, I don't really use this too often, but I figured it's there just in case you have that random Ryziel matchup. And the only reason I play it is just because it's a normal trap that you can use with trap tracks or copy the effect off of transaction rollback. Same thing with Evenly Matched, just as a board breaker. The 1 copy of Heartbeast Feather Duster. And then I do play a Shaddoll Fusion. And then just because obviously you play a Shaddoll engine in the deck. And then even if I don't side in Shaddoll Fusion going first, you can always still side in Shaddoll Aerial, which can help banish cards from your opponent's grave, which matters. And then the card I'm not the biggest fan of is Shaddoll Dragon. I think this is going to get replaced with something else. And as I said, Crime should be in the side deck. So this should probably be the Crime. And then you just replace the Crime with your copy of Meta Noise. So that's it for the deck profile, guys. Thank you for watching. Please leave your comments and suggestions and let me know what you think. Have a great day.